why are we better? Because we think at a time that these immigrants are in dire need, they're often in absolutely dire need, they will do anything to like fulfill those needs, right? As opposed to the local citizens that can rely on like their already formed connections, etc. Secondly, they come into this country wanting to make a place in the society in this country, and they feel more of an obligation to do something to deserve that place. And thirdly, they come from countries where those same kinds of factors don't exist, because they come from absolutely like underprivileged, deprived communities where the most important thing is to be able to get a job and able to provide for your families, as opposed to like preferring, I don't want to do this job because it's just not meant for me. Second comparative advantage, we think the countries benefit from the range of experiences that immigrations are able to provide. Before I move on, I'll take closing.
So like, okay, so clearly, even if countries have an obligation towards other countries, what's the comparative between other avenues available and this?
Sure. Yeah. So we think, first of all, it's not the comparative in that world, and that side cannot just run away. In the comparative, like sending lots of aid to those countries, etc., and those kinds of aid, right? Because we know the status quo where that does not happen. That side doesn't have the political capital to do that. Aid to different countries, to places such as Bangladesh, etc., are declining. Japan is not going to provide, and Singapore is not going to provide a lot of direct aid, Mr. Speaker. So in a scenario where the ways in which you can help people are limited, and this is one avenue to help people, if you have a moral obligation, you should probably choose this. Madam Speaker, on experiences, right? We think innovative solutions to problems is absolutely important in the development of the economy of a region. But often, those innovative solutions are limited by the kinds of experiences that you've had. We think, for example, Indian people who have a lot of experience in the setting up of local businesses, etc., can come into the Western Europe and bring in the entrepreneurial mindset that they have experience in those places, that they can bring in the knowledge that these kinds of businesses can also succeed. And we can do that, Madam Speaker, in societies where that culture does not exist. Final comparative advantage, Madam Speaker, is that there are huge costs associated with having your own citizens do those jobs as opposed to immigrants. First of all, because if you just want to like have more children, well, you have to go through the process of educating those children to the extent that education is mandatory in most societies, right? After 20 years, you can expect that maybe I'll get some benefit, which is not even certain that side. But secondly, right, there are benefits associated with citizenship that you have to give to those people that you don't necessarily need to go give to immigrants, Madam Speaker, right? You have to give them like things like CPF, you have to give them some sorts of like unemployment benefits, etc., that immigrants do not necessarily demand. We think you're able to get the job done at a far lower cost, and for those, that's another reason to prefer immigrants over citizens. For those reasons, incredibly proud to stand and opening up.
This feels like a very
Just a clear clarification of our stance. We aren't anti-immigration. We're okay with standard state policies that to some extent bring in immigrants to like a limited extent. What we aren't okay with is one, shaping our economy based on random immigrants that are influxing. Secondly, depending on immigrants for the entire future of our economy. And third, resorting to them as the only solution, because it is a trade-off. If you spend less and subsidize less in terms of incentivizing new children, you obviously have to trade it off. Yeah? Okay. With that being said, like a couple of engagements to like most of their benefits and harms on our side, because we don't think it's mutually exclusive. It exists on their side as well. So first, the idea of like moral obligation, other people are suffering, and how it's important to reach out to them. First, we don't think we owe a primary moral obligation at any point in time to external actors at a point in time where a country itself is suffering. I.e., if I find a policy that best suits my country, I don't have a moral obligation to sacrifice my individual well-being to look after other individuals. The conclusion of this is not that. The conclusion of this is that if I prove to you that our policy better caters to our country, we don't owe a moral obligation. Second, even if we do owe a moral obligation to these individuals, we don't see why other avenues of financially helping them don't exist. We could probably send development aid. We could probably help them like get better facilities in their own country, develop infrastructure, incentivize their governments, diplomatically pressure them, remove corruption, a whole list of other things we can do to make their lives better. We don't see how that moral obligation transcends to citizenship, i.e. bringing them in and treating them as one of our own, a mechanism that Virat has to clarify. With that being said, like the next idea, immigrants are often better. They're not selective about jobs. You can often like put them into any job you want. Immediate influx and immediate benefit to my economy. Not true. First, we often don't have immigrants that are like diverse in nature that cater to our own economy. So they say that immigrants don't want to do menial jobs. First clarification, most of these economies aren't manufacturing economies to begin with. They're service oriented, meaning that most of the immigrants that do come in for production are not really that useful. You need an influx of population that you can systematically train, subsidize, and make into individuals that fit my own economy, that isn't primarily dependent on like physical abilities, but technical know-how and knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. We haven't seen how all of these people come in. Secondly, we often do subsidize certain jobs, even for our own population, that incentivizes them to take them in. We think like we create industries that we benefit. We create regions that we want to create economic hubs around that forces people to move there. We don't do it explicitly, we do it tacitly. And they do end up eventually choosing the jobs we want to. So it's not really clear how it's mutually exclusive. We still get our population to do what we want them to do at the end of the day. But like the idea of like how there are huge costs associated with our own population. Yeah, there are huge costs associated with immigrants as well. You probably have to create a neighborhood for them. You probably have to incentivize them, otherwise they won't really show up. You probably have to train them in a new language. You have to assimilate them into your own economy, make sure they're ready for all of these things. These rebuttals, the harms they talk about are not mutually exclusive. For once, they have to show that it's specific. But there are massive level harms in their world that they absolutely did not bite as a trade-off. That's where my arguments come in. Firstly, we need to recognize exactly what this influx of immigration is perceived as. You tacitly or explicitly, we don't argue on what grounds, but you do imply that your own people are failing your country, i.e. your own population is not good enough to run the well-being of the country in the long run. You're not just equating this to a private institution, asking for more labor that comes in from abroad. You as a state are explicitly stating that you've given up hope from your own population and you've put your hope in individuals that are abroad. Is the individuals that are a part of the aging population feel underrepresented, irrelevant, and to some extent angered. What this means is, basic argument, they're really likely to not like these immigrants. What this eventually means, the Asian population is unlikely to treat these immigrants as one they can either live with or incorporate as one of their own. This means the conclusions are, they might isolate immigrants on a micro level. The fact that they live in their neighborhoods means they're likely to not interact with them as much. They're likely to not want to be in the same neighborhood. They're likely to pressurize their governments to cater to like enclaves that are set up for these immigrants. They're likely to empower governments that are populist and racist, which are so very harmful for the eventual country. So we recognize that a lot of these countries don't have a large like production facility right now and don't have population. The worst thing possible that can happen to these countries is one where the economy is suffering, but also empower a government that carries out bad policies for a fragile economy. This means a populist government that's likely to be populist and cater to short-term needs of people that they satisfy and not look after the long-term well-being of these nations. We've seen this happen all across Eastern Europe, the countries they talk about. We've seen this happen with the Red Dawn. We've seen this happen with Brexit. The Asian population of Britain could not see the immigrants taking up their jobs or even perceive it as taking up their jobs. Meaning, you impart a decision that affects the British economy irreversibly in the long run. The conclusion of all of this is, if you want to fix your economy, you can't empower a rhetoric that empowers a government that carries out bad, racist, populist policies that disincentivize the economy in the long run. We need engagement on that. Before that, yeah.
So many of these policies to try and train your own people to either have more children or to fit into those jobs have been tried and failed. What exactly is the alternative in countries like Singapore where there's absolutely no one to take up these jobs?
We don't think they failed. They probably failed in the short run. If you subsidize enough, we're okay with like waiting out the extra few years and eventually allowing us to grow those children into like people that can benefit our economy in the long run. That's a weight we're willing to take. But like, Also, we think these immigrants have their allegiances lie with their own original country first and the new host country second. What this means is when these people eventually come in, the first thing they think about is what the best outcome for themselves and their families back home is, not what the best outcomes for their country is, the one they're living in right now. Which means every production they do, the fact that OG agrees to it is a problem. It's a net loss for us. We empower them, we train them, we funnel money into them, but the money that they earn and produce is going back to a different country. The children on a comparative that we create are less likely to do this because these individuals we can train and subsidize and make sure they form into individuals that benefit our own economy, whose allegiances lie with our own economy, meaning they're more likely to carry a production capacity that is redistributed into our own economy. In the long run, we still have the same population. The costs and other harms exist in their world as well. They have to wait as well because they don't cater to the short-term benefits of training, and we are willing to wait that off. But the harm of it, the long-term implication of a bad government coming into power is irreversible. We expect engagement. Thank you very much.
This isn't law, right?
No.
Cool. Isha, can I start? Madam Speaker, don't let the opening opposition fool you, because this is not an active debate. This is not as the country, we do not want to debate as the country with an overaging population. We're debating in a value judgment debate. We have to take normative judgments on whether these countries should do it or not. This means that our incentives are not limited to that very nation, but limited to the entire world and a macroscopic view of how the world functions. So all their arguments which pertain to those very specific nations and benefits for those nations are not the only incentives within this debate. The debate exists far beyond that contextualization, recognition, and we want to deal with this on our side. They have no response to all the things we talked about, bettering the world, both in terms of economic efficiency and international diplomacy, and we expect Ronak to do so. So let's talk about the three things that we heard from them, right? They firstly told us that, long-term harms exist to those particular nations. I think immigrants do have an incentive to stay within those nations and contribute to an extent which is extensive and significant to those particular nations. We think they've seen better lives in those nations, as I have in Singapore when I moved here, and so has Shari. We think that we've already built communities over many years of living here, and so on and so forth. We don't think that we only think about our population back home in India and want to benefit it. Rather, I would possibly say and posit to you that at that point of time, we would rather think about moving our brothers and our families here in hopes for a better life, in hopes of being contributed citizens in Singapore society that has probably given us more than India ever could at that point of time. Secondly, they told us about, these economies are different. They don't have manufacturing jobs. We told you that even in knowledge-based economies such as Japan and Singapore, right, Madam Speaker, there exist jobs in healthcare and education and so on and so forth, which I think have which I think Indians and Bangladeshis and so on and so forth, with respect to China and their education systems, have a comparative advantage in fulfilling, which I think Japan and Singapore don't in terms of medicine and education and so on and so forth. But even if that was not true, we think even in a more socioeconomic stratified society, we think janitorial services, construction jobs and so on and so forth are very likely to be fulfilled by immigrants from other nations, and those are contributing members of society do not have burden on the state as they would like to presume. We think they contribute to society in a positive manner and help the society to be more equitable, not just within that nation, but across borders and across the world. But lastly, they told us, and this was the crux of their argument, right? They told us backlash against immigrants is significant and bad governments will be elected. I don't think so, because they conflated what refugees and immigrants are. Refugees are people who have to be, who are a burden on the state, who have to be given state support at all points of time with regards to when they come in to the particular country. We think economic immigrants rather contribute to society, take up jobs that other people don't, and I think the state still has a significant amount of executive authority for, as Shai told you, in terms of contractual obligations as to what jobs they should fulfill when they come in. At that point of time, we think that the inability of opening opposition to conceive a world where it looks more like Singapore or Japan, wherein people have comparative advantage as to what jobs they do within those particular institutions and within those particular countries, I think they lost the debate there. Because at that point, most of the population sees them as contributing members of the society that impact them positively and significantly. We think there's no backlash against them. But more importantly, if their argument was that people within the institution will say that people within the country will say now they are underrepresented in the whole population, do you think then we solve their problem better because people will be incentivized to have more children under our side more because now they think they're underrepresented within the population? We think without having financial incentives and subsidies, we acknowledge the problem and like people can have more children under our side. But let's talk about what we told you and we heard no response to. Right? We told you a few things. We told you that it's mostly first world nations like Singapore, Japan, Nordic countries, etc., where this problem exists. We think at the point of time where millions in the world are living in deprivation, it's far better that we normalize and equalize the allocation of resources by these countries by opening up the borders to immigrants such as from India and Bangladesh and so on. And this is to reiterate, Madam Speaker, this is not a moral debate but a value judgment on what these countries should do normatively when we think from a macro point of view. We think firstly, it increases the efficiency of allocation of resources, which of course the first world has more of and has more ability to distribute to individual citizens across the world. We think where progressive countries such as Japan and Singapore hold millions of dollars, etc., in the foreign reserves and so on and so forth, we think they have an ability to do that. At the point of time where they're given an easy avenue to do that rather than provide aid and so on and so forth, I'm going to deal with Shatab's POI regarding mutual exclusivity in a few moments. We think that it's far better to do so. But more importantly, we think this policy is an obligation morally that these countries have to fulfill, given that how they have reached the economic empowerment within this particular institution due to the structures of capitalism and negligence that allow them to exploit these countries within the first place. We think the comparative advantage they've gained is at the expense of these countries from where these events come from, being able to exploit them with respect to manufacturing jobs and so on. And so they have a moral obligation. We heard no response. So why is it different and mutually exclusive, right? Why can't, according to them, we give them aid, fund millions of dollars, remove bureaucratic governance? We think at the point of time we have limited financial capital, either to subsidize their own citizens to have more children and have, or like provide them for the cost of that thing, or rather have immigrants come in and provide you short-term and even long-term benefits with regards to your economic empowerment. We think it's far better that these countries have the ability to do so. But more importantly, at the point of time you have an easy avenue to do so, we think your moral obligation should be to fulfill that avenue and make sure that these countries receive the economic benefits that we're talking about. So now, we also think it benefits both nations, the callers and the callees. We think in terms of the nations where they emigrate from, countries like India, China, etc., they're able to firstly take better care of their own population within those countries, Madam Speaker, because at the point of time where this money goes back home to that country, it can be funneled into bettering the lives of families back home and communities back home. But more importantly, it can build stronger bilateral ties with nations regarding both economic and international political diplomacy. Let's talk about other nations in PY.
As far as these countries and solving their crisis goes, they have a lot of alternatives available, like maybe just automating these jobs. Why is it marginally more profitable for these countries? That's the stakeholder too.
Yeah, so I'm talking about these countries now. Why Shariq, in his speech, when he talked about comparative advantages and diversity of skills and lived experiences, these are the benefits that O never contended with. I'm going to extend them even more. We think the comparative advantage within these nations where people emigrate to is far more than what O could contend with. We think, firstly, Shariq told you how they already fulfill things that need to be fulfilled. And these are not jobs can be automated. These are jobs that people cannot actually fulfill. And if they had to be automated, they would have been done already within these nations. We think these are jobs that people need to fulfill within those particular nations. More importantly, how a nation improves and progresses, not just economically, Madam Speaker, but more on cultural diversity is through this. Because in a highly globalized world where we think exists today, cultural knowledge, diversity, and comprehensive nature of thought, where it comes from different lived experiences of different people across the world when they emigrate to your country, is far more in terms of industrial bilateral relations, in terms of politics, in terms of international relations. We think it's far better on our side. But more importantly, it reduces the burden on the state with regards to expectations of migration being far less than the expectations of an average citizen from that particular state. On all these reasons, we think OG takes us to
recognize that we would once again like to assert that countries have no inherent responsibilities towards other nations. Even when they're at a point of crisis, or even when they're not, we don't think it's the responsibility of one particular nation to prioritize or look into the interests of some other nation before taking care of its own. But do recognize this, even if you want to develop other countries, and even if we concede that there is some degree of responsibility that there exists, understand the massive harm that the opening government is like condoning on behalf of these countries. So assuming that you want to bring in more immigrants into your nation from countries where economic opportunities are perhaps not as prevalent, what you're inherently bringing in are plausibly one of the most talented individuals from those particular countries, because you're probably looking into sectors where you want to have the highest degree of talent or more contributing members of society in these particular areas, which means that these countries suffer through massive brain drain, which means that the best individuals in those countries are more likely to leave and come to your nation, which means that you don't do a great bit of benefit to those countries either. But on top of that, because you think that you have fulfilled your responsibility, assuming it exists, you think that you have fulfilled your responsibility by bringing in more of those individuals from those countries and incorporating them as your own citizens. You don't think that you have any external or additional responsibility in terms of solving their poverty, or in terms of giving other extraneous benefits that you would have otherwise given. Which means the dialogue or discourse shifts to that we have already covered our responsibility and we don't need to do anything substantially more from the countries that they emigrate from. We think that's problematic. But understand this, the nature of even if these individuals come into your country and become more eligible to the state in the long run, in the short run, you will inevitably have a huge degree of remittance outflows, which is coming back to the home country, which is not necessarily improving our economy. But more importantly, if you look at countries with aging populations, these are most likely countries which have had some degree or a massive degree of development. So if you analyze the nature of like Japan and China, or like Japan and many other countries in Europe, most of these countries have had a degree of development towards which most of their jobs are automated, and most things can be solved without bringing in a massive influx of people. If the idea is to bring in immigrants, understand how this is different from your conventional or other forms of immigration that happen within status quo. You wish to incorporate them as long-term citizens, and the message that you permeate across society is that you don't have hope within your current population to do that. It's extremely undignified of you to claim that your population or your people can solve this particular purpose, because you claim that these are not capable of taking up the mantle of leadership in the future. Which means that even if there is a natural tension that we constantly have because of language and culture, all other is now magnified because their nature of entrance into your country is not a normal one, or not an organic one, but it's rather the state recognizes that we have no other way out, which means that individuals more being recipient of these immigrants coming, i.e. assimilation of otherwise organically happened better with other ethnicities at their normal is not disrupted, because you bring in a massive number of people from outside, which creates internal tension and which permanently creates a situation in which these individuals are likely to detect them more. We don't think that's something that's worth achieving. Yes.
This debate is not about cases where automation can solve the problem, because in those cases, you also don't increase the population of your country to solve those problems. Right? This debate is about between these alternatives, you need to solve a problem that automation cannot fix.
So if this is indeed a problem that automation cannot fix, it's probably you're looking at the long-term growth of your population. So if you're looking at the long-term growth of your population, you're probably gonna be able to solve that by increasing or incentivize the population to have children among themselves as well. So it's not that can't be solved in our world. We don't think that the proposition shows you anything apart from a cost analysis as to why incentivizing your own people to have more children is something that's worth solving. So if this debate barely being done from the aspect of cost from the opening government or the aspect of moral responsibility. I think we've shown you both on both circumstances why A, don't have a moral responsibility, or even if you do that moral responsibility, reach at the very point you ruin other nations where you bring these individuals from. But understand this: how are these people likely to contribute to the sort of political discussion that happens? These most people remain inert to any, like, either in politically neutral or like absolutely remain uncontributive to the kind of political discussion or discourse that happens in your country. Even if it does, these immigrants are more likely to push the country to which they immigrate into to becoming more contributive to other countries, or to bring in more refugees from other countries at a point of time that countries can't do so. Which means individuals immigrating at mass number in Europe might try and influence European governments to have in more immigrants, because obviously their families and all loved ones back home are waiting to come to that country as well, and at a point of time when those governments or institutions or societies are not ready to harbor them, or not economically capable of harboring them. That's problematic because because you empower the right wing that Sajid talked about, because there's massive opposition to this kind of political influences or motivations or sways that this incoming population does. I think that's particularly problematic. But we all think that if most of these immigrants are here to solve a particular job or fulfill a particular type of person society, it's inherently immoral to create a subclass of citizens in order to save your own citizens. We would rather do that by incentivizing or creating an egalitarian society in which you already incentivize the present populace to have children among themselves and do it better. But understand this: even ethnicities within your present population are more likely to be able to integrate amongst each other if you incentivize the entire population to do so. If you bring in immigrants from outside, sure, it will be the majority, but small minorities or pockets of population within your country who are being ignored and who are probably at the worst case are more likely to be disenfranchised and not seen as contributing. We think that's problematic. For all these reasons, we think opposition is fragile.
Mr. Hakim, sorry, do you see the recap? Germany before other speech goes to the washroom.
The modus operandi is, and also around PM, I went to take a dump with Brad. Everyone. Ignore. Yeah. Go to the bathroom. I want material and you finish. I'm going to take out all of opening up case in 1 minute. I'm going to assume everything they say is correct. They still have no viable policy for 3 reasons. First, even in the most optimistic of scenarios, France, in order to replace your population, you need 2.1 children for every 2 parents. Even France is below the replacement rate, given the fact that, even despite the fact that they're very liberal towards single moms, liberal towards having government-run childcare centers, generous welfare policies, and having a strong economy. Unfortunately, most countries do not have all of these advantages, which means your policy to raise the domestic birth rate is going to fail. Furthermore, there are structural factors that will not change even under your policy. The fact that both males and females today have other ambitions apart from child rearing, which means they're far less likely to have children, that the cost of raising kids to higher standards is far greater, and that people choose to concentrate all of the resources onto one kid in most instances, maybe 2 if you're lucky, which means your policy is not going to be effective. The effect is an irreversible decline, not reversible. Mind you, firstly, because the majority of voters in an aging society like Japan are old, conservative, anti-immigrant, which is very reverse all the shit we were going to talk about. most importantly, it's now less attractive to foreigners because your economy is weak. So even in the future, if you have more immigration, if you want to have some immigration, people just won't care, which means your solution is irreversibly harmful. I'm going to talk about 2 points of extension before I move on to addressing other things in the debate. Of how restricting immigration harms various underprivileged groups in society. I think OG talked to you about how it harms like foreigners who have an opportunity to escape poverty in their countries and seek a better living elsewhere. But I think one group of people is critically ignored in this particular debate: females. People who don't want to have children or who can't have children. Let me explain why. Because especially in societies like Singapore, where there is increasing pressure to have children, what happens typically, socially and culturally, and perhaps even politically, when our Prime Minister talks about these things, pressure women to stick to their gender roles and have more kids, even at the expense of their careers. Yeah. It means that, especially when this is not merely about societal pressure or like political pronouncements, when it affects social policy and political policy, like when you're tying welfare to the fact that you are a mother or that you are a part of a married couple, for example, this means that people who don't want to have children, who want to live, who want to seek a more meaningful life for themselves, or who cannot have children for reasons of biology or poverty, are unfairly disadvantaged by the welfare policy. You're throwing an entire class of women under the bus as a result of your policy. So if you want to take care of your natural born citizens first, you're not dealing with half of the entire natural born population. That's a problem. No, thank you. Second area of extension: how in the long run, it is only our policy of immigration that ensures regional political and economic stability. So they talked about, OG talked about, the principal short-term economic benefits, which will fairly well explain, of immigration policy. We're going to talk about the long-term, right? The greatest trend that we observed recently, in the last several decades, the idea that greater political and economic integration accompanies like integration accompanies like immigration policy. Why? Because only when you have free movement of labor throughout members of the European Union, for example, that you create integrated welfare systems to take care of these individuals, that you have European law that ensures that these individuals and the companies that they work for are adequately protected so that they can operate in multiple countries. All of these things ensure, being replicated slowly, in like the African Union's drive to have a unified passport or fledgling common market schemes in ASEAN. As long as you have free immigration, you have all of these other things that promote economic ties throughout various countries and ensure that the economic future of this region is sound. More importantly, it also imposes costs to exiting this union, as it is about to find out. And the reason why this is important is because political and economic integration that free immigration and free trade provide is the solution to long-term conflict, either of an economic or a military or political nature between countries in the long term, because the cost of creating something is too high at the point in time in which you are reliant on this for your work, that your own people are overseas earning a living elsewhere, that your companies require foreign markets to survive, and that this entire infrastructure can only hold if you have free immigration in the first place. Otherwise, the EU will retaliate and then not allow British workers into the EU. Alternative that we are looking at is mercantilism, potential armed conflict between these countries in areas which are not as integrated as the European Union. This is something that the European Union has assiduously worked to avoid for the last 70 years, and we think similar problems can happen in the future. That is also why it's pursuing economic, like the Vietnam-Cambodia War in the 1970s and 1980s instance. The solution to long-term political future is to ensure economic integration through free immigration. No, thank you. Now I'm going to move on to two other things I want to talk about. There's lots of extension material anyway, but we're building on whatever the GNO have already talked about, and I'll extend further in several areas. Right, nationalism. The main part of OO's case is a temporary phenomenon. All things shall come to pass. Even this shall pass. Several reasons. One, people hate foreigners stealing jobs because they feel left behind economically. So the main problem is not necessarily immigration, but with economics, right? Firstly, they got the root cause of the problem wrong. Secondly, it's compounded shutting down immigration because now you weaken your own economic welfare and you weaken the fund policies, which are the main reason why people are going to far-right nationalists in the first place. Second, this is often tied to second-generation immigrants, which are not fully integrated. By the time you impose this policy for another 20 years, while a third-generation immigrants are fully integrated into society, this should not be a problem. Even if immigration is doomed to happen, say that if you remove immigration or immigration, it leads to the same outcome far-right parties want anyway. I'll take a POI very quickly.
So in the end, why is it ideal for these countries to even want to expand population as long as there are feasible alternatives without expanding
Okay, so
population?
prove the feasible alternatives, one. And secondly, given all the analysis that OG and CG have talked to you about, declining tax bases, welfare schemes which are screwed, your economics which are screwed, I think I've already proved my case. Last but not least, this generation of individuals is going to die anyway, right? At the point in time in which this policy spans 20 years, once the older generation dies out, the younger generation is far more likely to support pro-immigration policies. I don't see why O's case holds any water. Not at least, I'm going to talk about other aspects of immigration that Virat and Sharik have not yet talked about. First, that is particularly important in countries like China and Japan. I know they've mentioned this. The reason for this is because China and Japan have a history of being particularly intolerant to foreigners. And unless you start this policy now, when the critical point of regard aging Chinese population hits them in the next 20 years, they will be sufficiently socially used to the idea of immigration for them to reverse this particular policy. It also means that you have opportunity to attract trade in terms of tendencies like setting up the headquarters in your country, your small enterprises, and foreign labor in order to keep costs low and remain competitive. All of these things ensure that the long-term political and economic survival of the entire region and your own country process and females and other minorities within your countries is safe.
Yeah. Oh, use your example, bro, that you want to move to Singapore soon. Oh, mistake.
I wish you did.
Question the computer.
Yeah.
The discussion in opening half has really revolved around developed countries. I think what I want to do in this speech is focus on how this really massively fucks over developing countries, how there's going to be a massive loss of labor capital, of welfare capital, of rich capital, and how you make those individuals employ them far more, and also how the of accountability that people will feel will mean that you have versus primarily worse developing countries. Before that, I want to frame a couple of things. Let's first compare the developing countries and who needs support. So first of all, understand three things. Number one, and this is where I'll frame up a lot of government. Number one, developed countries are under the alternative we see is not really that they have to come up with lots of rates. The alternative is also a third world country. I mean, it's like if they need manufacturing, if they need to build a factory, they do it inside of a country that do have that labor capital. Second of all, we think that the reason why developed countries are always better off than developing countries because they have massive amounts of capital, the economies are already relatively well developed. But thirdly, the reason why we think developed countries are just better off than developing countries is because they have the most fluid kind of economy. So those aging people can still, to a large extent, work. That in population, and even if you took a different job, there's still the kind of different jobs that you have. There's not really a problem for developed countries. I think the main problem is in developing countries. Let's go into a few things and how this massively fucks them over. All right. Number one, let's first understand who will be able to immigrate. So there's two things I'm going to argue here. First of all, capital flight happens, and second of all, knowledge flight happens. So insofar as the only people who are able to leave are the most educated, that means that the people who are capable of having the capital, who would have been able to create SMEs, who would have been able to create jobs, who would have been able to create sustainable income and create demand and market those economies necessarily leave as they immigrate. That's also a large amount of money that would have been that you have to invest into immigrating of itself. Let's not change to another country. Secondly, knowledge happens. The incentive that Bangladesh has to build a university is that those people will give back towards that economy. If those people are leaving towards service sector jobs or other jobs inside first world countries, there's very little incentive to go towards those developing, towards developing universities. It's what they actually focus on are low-skilled labor that they've continuously been focusing on, and that means that there's very little incentive or very little benefit of them building those universities to begin with. Sit down. It means you lock those countries into forever only having low-skilled labor that, by the way, is not sustainable given the fact that automation will eventually take over, means that those countries in the long run, very time-sensitive, what we're talking about here, are massively left over. The second thing which massively makes things worse for developing countries. Understand the way in which economies of developing countries are built. They derive around labor capital. That's two things. So first of all, given if all like very smart talent exists inside that country, that means you increase foreign direct investment towards that country. The incentive for sit down a massive NC to build a factory in India as opposed to America is if all your brilliant people, if your factory managers exist in India, not if they immigrate to the US. What does that foreign direct investment do? That foreign direct investment literally means that those people have more capital. It means that they have jobs. Sit down. There are little towns created around MNCs where they come in and for people. Second of all, the competition of labor. So in a third world country, the reason why companies come in and create manufacturing jobs, sit down, is because they have massive amounts of capital, right? If those people immigrate out, your capital also goes out. There's literally zero reason for a company to come in and invest. Sit down. Sit down. Third of all, why is this extremely important? So, comparative comes in. I agree. Some immigrants are going to be benefited under their side because those are the immigrants that go towards the first world countries. Let's compare that. So, first of all, the people who are behind usually the ones with very little capital, very little education, are the least privileged. We want to prioritize these people the most. So we don't care about those people who went there. But secondly, I think you can still have those benefits, or the Indians who didn't immigrate can still have those benefits if they didn't leave, because companies zero-sum game within the agreement necessarily. Before I go into my issue, article clothing.
That most of these countries are knowledge-based economies. What these countries
I think that the reason is economics. That's all things that also economics. Ladies and gentlemen, what does the Japanese spokesperson fear? He fears that his culture will be taken away, that Japanese culture will no longer exist, that person and the people who come will bring in their own culture, their own idea of what hand is like. That's specifically what a Japanese person fears. What do they see? They see the viscerality. You see of your aging population. You don't carry and pass on your culture. What you see are people who this is not analysis that you did. This is literally the influx of new immigrants feeds into the narrative that the Japanese culture will go away. That's a specific attack on identity. How do we impact this? What does that mean? It means the impact of this is that there's likely going to be massive racist policies that push back against it given towards third world countries in the first place. So if you think that before this, first developed world country would have ever given aid towards a developing country, very unlikely to happen insofar as they are far more racist towards those people, but insofar as they feel like they're already giving so much to them inside their own country, from their own culture, from their own economies, from all that benefits. What does this mean? It means that you're massively harming third world countries, their ability to get aid, their ability to get foreign direct investment, their ability to change the minds of the people on the ground. Why is this extremely important? Because most of the push from aid come from people who are lobbying people inside the government who are telling these people that there isn't massive amounts of pushback. Insofar, secondly, as is a current trend and right-wing rhetoric that exists particularly within European countries, means that it's something that's currently taking hold. Even if Adil comes up and tells me that long-term it won't work, short-term it's massive harm towards developing countries who need it right now before automation can be able to put on the table. That's why we're proud to oppose.
Yeah. Go Shamdeel. Degenerates represent.
I want to start by dealing with closing opposition, because I think that the presumption in opposition is the idea that firstly, the demand for immigrant labor in the developed world is so high, it would completely remove any source of labor or talent within developing nations. Countries that are literally suffering from overpopulation, where a large number of individuals that are being taken into these developed countries work in local manufacturing sectors. As G has already told you, I don't understand why is it that you seem to presume that all of your brain drain is going to leave the country. Actually, skilled individuals do choose to stay in developing countries because they can live better lives than individuals who are unskilled in these places to begin with. Second thing that we want to talk about, this idea somehow it's unnecessary for developed countries to have a lot of people. We are going to give you 4 reasons to why exactly you actually need people and why exactly you can't survive without them. Firstly, I think Shari has pointed out, automation, if it was a possibility, wouldn't require this motion to begin with. But I think there are a couple more reasons that I think. Firstly, tax-based. There's floor to the amount of money you need to collect from your people to have good and efficient infrastructure development. Secondly, consumer-based. You need more people within your country to buy your own goods so that your own local companies are able to reap things like economies of scale. 3, you need things like, for example, if, you require labor base for your own because every country is low to the kind of number of people to be able to deal with the lower level like sector jobs or even higher level sector jobs. And oftentimes the kind of like the way in which your country, especially one as aging population, is able to funnel individuals into these specialized jobs, for example, is incredibly like it does not help, right? So like you oftentimes have like lacks in many various sectors. In this particular comparative, the question then was, what exactly was opposition going to do about any of these things for these developed countries? And notice that they just try to point a lot of problems that might happen in the world, but they don't do the comparative as to how exactly this helps how exactly this benefits both the developed nations and the developing nations as a whole. So for the developed nations, understand that many developed nations have tried and failed in their ability to try and get a greater population. I will give you a couple of endemic reasons to why. Firstly, when you have more education in your nation, as the nation tends to have, people feel more liberated. They feel like they have access to like that are outside the parochial ideas that you need to have more children. There's a reason why they focus more on their self-actualization rather than having more children. Females are more liberated. They don't want to have children so young anymore. Like families recognize that with a higher cost of living, having more children is financial burden to them. Therefore, the problems of an aging population are them in these developed countries. Not enough as opening opposition tells you that you can simply just try and get them to have more babies. Neither does closing up give you a good reason as to why. The other response is this: we can just invest in developing nations because that gives them the benefits regardless. Well, I already told you why you need to have more like you actually need people within your nation for function. But here's where our extension became important because we need to recognize that states often have a moral obligation on people. So I think only good jobness of covering what a macro view of obligations are. We're talking about obligations to your own citizens. Why is this important? Because at the end of the day, you need to recognize the ways in which states often fall for these kinds of family policy to come up is at the expense of everyone else who is not able to actually be able to access kinds of policies to begin. So if you look at Singapore, for example, we have things like housing policies for families. We have things like, for example, tax subsidies and rebates for these families. Understanding that oftentimes these are populations that have access to ideas of sexualization. What your policy of friendliness does is you systematically marginalize anyone who wants to make the very legitimate choice of not being a person with their family and not wanting to have those children to begin with. Recognizing this is a substantial portion of your own country and recognizing you have the right to these decisions, the only possible alternative for the government is to have immigrants in your country. And note that you're still serving the same obligations because you don't give them additional rights. You still give your citizens preferential treatment within your nation versus those of the immigrants, and that's how you're able to ensure that these people have better rights. But also recognize that the reason why you still need people in your country, for example, is because even through aging population can still work. There's a problem developed nations face, their retirement ages and your ability to access your pensions gets later and later as your own people refuse to let immigrants in and still want to work, and therefore they to work. That's the problem that Japan is facing as well, where like literally the country is 65 years old because of their government's refusal to allow immigrants into their nation to begin with. No. What about economics? What exactly do we think the economics are worse off? We told you in that what this does is allow the economic ties. There are a few reasons we told you. Firstly, we argued to you that oftentimes the reason why you have is because when there are more immigrants from a specific, perhaps geographically like proximate nation, this creates a better understanding of their culture. The example of Japan doesn't work for closing opposition because Japan has always had a closed door policy, which is the precise reason for the paranoia in the first place. Because they've never been confronted with the idea of immigrants. They've always seen it as a specter that hangs over their head. The difference is in countries where there have been like frequent amounts of immigration. Don't take Brexit as example, because we are going to posit to you that the reason for the right-wing paranoia is because we're in a time of recession. That's an utter reality, but recessions don't happen all the time. At the point before this, when the European Union was National Economic Union, people were very happy with immigrants because immigrants provided and filled up the lack of job facilities in certain areas and also provided cheaper labor for these individuals and countries that allow for better economic. Yeah.
At points of crisis, people are most sensitive about their identity and whether it's being preserved in the long run. Which means, at a point of crisis, you bring in a massive influx of people, it's more likely to consolidate the right-wing rhetoric and make people more pissed off about the natural process of immigration and regularly occurs in this country.
So, like, that's the thing, right? In times, this motion doesn't require us to talk about time of crisis. It requires us to talk about a long-term, like, economic plan. So yes, you can like temporarily stop immigration during the time of a recession just to give your people some sort of political support. But the fact of the matter is, what's your long-term economic plan? It should be immigrants. I'm going to give some credit to OG here. They already told you it's going to be a gradual process, not suddenly 100,000 immigrants are going to come in. Okay. Next thing that we also wanted to tell you about, most of these ties with regards to like greater facility, incredibly good for this nation for reasons that we've already given to you. But also, we wanted to talk about SMEs as well. So to the extent to which local individuals in your nation rely on these foreigners or immigrants to provide cheaper services, so their own businesses are on a lower cost. Small startups, the ability to hire the higher wages that locals require because these locals are living in a developed nation versus the repatriation to the developed economy we want to talk about. Definitely requires just these companies. But lastly, this idea of aid, very quickly, aid is given for political reasons. They're not given because they have goodwill towards a particular nation. All of these like right-wing paranoia argument about developing countries and the developing countries face a lot more economic problems. This is developers. Bye.
She said bye.
The government worked for that speech, maybe the opposition worked for this.
Yeah. Immigrant represent.
As the first immigrant in this debate.
We are already too past our first group.
From closing. Closing says two things, right? That's different. The first is they say it's going to force women in these countries to make more babies, and that's a bad thing. The first response is, I think it's really insulting to even assert that a woman in Japan can't look at an advertisement and change her decision about whether or not to have a baby. No forcing them. Even if you're incentivizing your citizens to have more children and a woman changes her decision, she did it out of necessity. But the second one also extremely important. Under your side, you're pushing women in Bangladesh, women in Nigeria to have more kids, and that's why governments are actually oppressed, because in these countries, the people who are able to make the most of change are being driven out. Assuming that all of these countries will carry on this policy, we have to consider a huge number of people will be immigrating from those countries. But the third response, another response is like, Sharif's case was exceptionally important because we were the first team in the debate to relate this is a world under which you create an economy with less people. The alternative doesn't have to be more people in your country. Rather, the alternative is creating ways in which you diversify and reduce the necessity to rely on citizens to begin with. So the citizens to the left can take up leadership positions and white positions, and in that case, it's easier to come with a solution. So that's regarding that. A lot of the other responses will be integrated. So now, like these three things in the debate, that's exceptionally important. Right? The first and the most important thing in the debate we think is about the 5 reasons why She said developing countries will be exceptionally worse off. Sharif said, Sharif said developing countries will be worse off because you're going to drive out people who have a lot of capital. Maybe this is not the wealthiest individuals in Bangladesh, but these are the people in the middle class. It means they have significant amount of money. They can't go and be the biggest corporation, but they do go on and create like maybe a company that becomes a part of the supply chain for a corporation. It means these are the more innovative people in these countries. These are the investors you drive out and you show them the dream of a better country, the dream of a better country, right? And that's the case and argument under your side anyway. So you have to bite that arm and trade off. Except Sharma did that, right? But the second thing Sharif also said that was also exceptionally important is how, like, he actually showed me the process through which you create a high value, move the value chain ladder, the process through which you try foreign direct investment, etc., etc. The process through which you create meaningful political engagement, because recognize these being the most educated people means that they're the only ones who are capable of creating meaningful political engagement. Alternative is you drive these people out. She had two responses to that. The first is, oh, but there's an overpopulation. That's like extremely dismissive of nuance, that overpopulation doesn't mean that there's still a limited number of people who are exceptionally capable, upper middle class, capable of moving out in these countries and have all these necessary under these four speeches. Therefore, you have to bite the harm regarding how these people will be different now. I think it's shameful that Sharma never tried to engage with that, right? But the second thing is, she says that many people will stay. Let's give them and say this was a valid response. You have to bite the trade-off that these many people will still be the ones that are least capable, the least good at attracting FDI, the least good, like taking up leadership positions, the least good at actually innovating in successful businesses and stuff like that. So in the collective, you have to concede the harm that you will lose out and cripple these third world nations, in the long run. Open.
Yes. Immigration is very expensive and you have to give up ties with your local communities. If that is true, why won't people only move in the cases where they are unable to find any sort of job in their own countries?
No, you're just assuming that, okay, this is very contradictory. You are not just going to show them a dream, you're going to make it exceptionally easier. There's at least 5 exceptionally options. Your policy is in these countries, there's going to be a massive influx of immigrant population. You can't just say that's something that will only be accessible to a limited number of people in these countries. You have to consider that. See, here's the thing, Virat. Maybe you're top 1% in terms of the smartest in India. Under your side, it's not just the top 1% that moves out, it's the top 5 to 8%, and like that population moving up means India and Bangladesh is crippled in the long term. But Bangladesh has a smaller population, so it's probably worse anyway for countries like us, right? And this is the most important part of the debate. We recognize, as the opening government said, the only obligation in this debate is good for the developed countries. Rather, the bigger obligation is what's all of the world and what's good for the most disadvantaged countries. We win this debate based on this. But two more things in the debate, right? The second thing in the debate, therefore, is we developed countries then. See, here's the thing. Don't like strawman Sharif, right? Sharif's argument wasn't just about everything is mechanizing, therefore we're going to mechanize all kinds of stuff. Sharif's argument was like in manufacturing jobs, etc. You can literally divert. You can outspice them more feasible or that's more profitable anyway, as opposed to having to pay more tax and stuff. No engagement, right? But this only says that, oh, but you still have like low-level jobs. Like, only going to attract people with low-level jobs, then you don't have significant immigration anyway. So you have to consider the harm that we will prioritize significant immigration over just sticking to these countries' priorities, right? But more importantly, see, Sharif said that there's an alternative in this motion. The alternative within developed countries use their built skill, which is massive, everyone to move towards a less populated economy, i.e. taking away responsibility from citizens and either automating it when possible, but we're not automating it, giving it to leadership roles and outsourcing the rest when that's possible. See, this second extension was exceptionally important because this is what leads to the third issue in the debate. Because in this case, these countries play a more positive role. In terms of the final engagement in the debate, see, this argument about why these countries react negatively was very different from the whole, because the comparative is this. See, here's the thing. This debate doesn't happen in countries like Singapore, where they don't have a defined identity to begin with. And that extension is exceptionally important. Because compared to Singapore, countries like Japan have a defined identity that they value and internalize, right? And Sharma actually considered that. Because for a Japanese person, the value of wabi-sabi is important. And if you do not recognize it, you are not a true Japanese. Because for a Scandinavian person, the value of recognizing a lot of unique philosophies that the Vikings propagated is exceptionally important. Why is this extension from Sharif important? It means, given that you talk about these countries, the resistance is also going to be significantly higher. So what's your trade-off in your side? As Sharif said, what's your trade-off is political engagement. And don't say you have to have a wholesale political change. Rather, you only need some political change, like what happened in Netherlands, like what happened in the Scandinavian countries, where only by 10% immigrant population, enough right-wing politicians were created, where all the left-wing politicians were no longer able to propagate the issues of globalization, no longer able to propagate their claims of need, because they become political liabilities and not a benevolent world. We tell you it's not better when every country in the world can retreat to their own identity. But in case of these countries, you create an impetus for creating change, moving outside. There's more than one dream. We have the better dream. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdul.